Beyond the shadows, something remarkable has happened. We've hit 10,000 subscribers on Void of Fears. To everyone who subscribed, liked, commented, and shared, thank you. This milestone exists because of you. But our journey into the darkness has only begun. Now we set our sights on 100,000 subscribers. An ambitious goal, but together, we can reach it. Your engagement fuels this channel. Every like and comment helps these nightmares find new victims across the algorithm. Now let's dive into the void where tonight's story awaits you. The incessant howling of Antarctic winds against my cabin window jarred me awake. I'm Dr. James Wilson, geophysicist, and this marks my 5th week aboard the naval vessel Polaris, bound for the southernmost region on Earth. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the dossier on my desk, not from the cold, but from what I'd learned about our mission. Sleep had become a luxury I could scarcely afford. Each night brought increasingly vivid nightmares, vast, dark spaces beneath miles of ice, and something ancient stirring after millennia of dormancy. The dreams left me drenched in sweat despite the ship's perpetually chilled air. According to the ship's physician, I wasn't the only one suffering from these nocturnal disturbances. The Polaris herself seemed to resist our journey south. Twice we'd experienced engine failures that the chief engineer couldn't explain. Navigation systems malfunctioned with alarming frequency, showing impossible positions before correcting themselves. Most disturbing were the radio communications. Bursts of static that, when analysed, contained patterns too regular to be random interference. This morning the temperature read minus 15 degrees Celsius, practically balmy for Antarctic waters in November 1959. Through my porthole window, I watched massive icebergs drift past, their blue-white surfaces concealing 9/10 of their true mass beneath the surface. An apt metaphor, I thought grimly, for our mission and whatever awaited us at Outpost 31. It began 3 months ago, with an unexpected visit from 2 men in pristine military uniforms. They had approached me after a lecture I'd given at Columbia University on seismic anomalies in polar regions. What initially seemed like professional interest quickly revealed itself as recruitment. The military needed someone with my expertise for what they called a recovery operation at Outpost 31, a research station established in Antarctica during the International Geophysical Year of 1957 to 1958. I remember the initial meeting vividly. My lecture hall had emptied, students filing out into the crisp October evening when the 2 officers approached. The older man introduced himself as Colonel Reynolds, his weathered face bearing the hallmarks of someone who had seen combat and worse. His companion, Major Donovan, remained silent throughout our conversation, his eyes constantly scanning the room, as though expecting threats to materialize from among the lecture hall's empty seats. "Your research on deep ice seismology is unparalleled, Dr. Wilson," Reynolds had said, placing a folder stamped with classification warnings on my desk, "particularly your theories on anomalous reflections in subglacial readings." I'd published those theories 3 years earlier to academic ridicule. My proposal that certain seismic readings from Antarctica suggested large-scale structural anomalies beneath the ice was dismissed as equipment error or misinterpretation of data. I'd fought the subsequent damage to my reputation by focusing on less controversial research. "You've read my discredited papers," I responded, unable to hide my bitterness. "Congratulations on your thorough background check." Reynolds didn't smile. "They weren't discredited in certain circles, Doctor. In fact, your theories align precisely with classified findings from Outpost 31. The entire research team and military personnel stationed there vanished overnight on January 17th, 1958, explained the older officer, Colonel Reynolds. His weathered face betrayed no emotion as he slid photographs across my desk. 47 people, Dr. Wilson, gone without explanation. I remember scoffing initially. People don't simply vanish, Storms, equipment failures, miscommunication. These were the rational explanations I offered. But then they showed me the radio transmissions, the final communications that made me question everything I thought I understood about our world. The photographs showed a series of aerial reconnaissance images taken of Outpost 31 before and after the incident. The facility appeared intact. No structural damage, no signs of evacuation or disaster. Personal equipment remained outside, including several snowmobiles. A weather balloon launch was apparently in progress, the balloon itself frozen in place, still tethered to its ground equipment. "This makes no sense," I muttered, examining the images more closely. "Where did they go? Antarctica offers nowhere to hide." "Hence our need for your expertise," Reynolds replied. A third image showed what appeared to be a standard seismometer reading. This was recorded 3 days before the disappearance. I studied the paper, recognizing the distinct pattern of ice sheet movement, nothing unusual. "And this," Reynolds continued, "was recorded 12 hours before all communication ceased." The second reading made me sit upright. The pattern showed distinctive harmonic resonance, almost like it's as though the ice itself was vibrating at a consistent frequency, I said, unable to hide my fascination. "But that's impossible with standard glacial mechanics." "Precisely why we've spent 18 months analyzing these readings." Major Donovan spoke for the first time, his voice unexpectedly soft. "The pattern repeats with increasing amplitude until the moment of disappearance." Reynolds produced a small tape recorder from his briefcase. "This is the final radio transmission from Dr. Victor Ambrose, the expedition's lead scientist. It was sent at 3:26 a.m., January 17th, 1958. 1 minute later, all communication permanently ceased." The crackling audio filled my office. A man's voice, educated but increasingly frantic. "Command, this is Ambrose. The drilling has... We've broken through to something. The readings were correct. There's a chamber or structure beneath us. The ice around the drill shaft is exhibiting impossible properties. Henderson touched it, and he changed somehow. Others are changing too. It's affecting their minds first, then physical alterations begin. Please advise immediately on containment protocols for biological..." Static interrupted the transmission briefly before Ambrose's voice returned, now eerily calm. "Disregard previous transmission. We understand now. It's not dead, merely dormant. God help us, it's waking up beneath the ice." The recording ended. Reynolds watched me intently as I processed what I'd heard. "That's all?" I asked finally. "That's all," Reynolds confirmed. "No further communications were received. A rescue mission was dispatched 1 week later. They found the base exactly as you see. In the photographs, operational but completely abandoned. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of where 47 people could possibly have gone." Now, as the Polaris cuts through the frigid waters of the Southern Ocean, those transmissions replay in my mind. The final message still chills me more than the sub-zero temperatures awaiting us. It's not dead, merely dormant. God help us, it's waking up beneath the ice. I'd spent weeks poring over every scrap of information about Outpost 31 before boarding the Polaris. The facility had been established as part of the International Geophysical Year initiatives, ostensibly to study Antarctic ice formations and climate patterns. The official manifest listed 32 scientific personnel and 15 military support staff, a curiously high military presence for a civilian research operation. The scientists represented diverse fields: glaciology, geology, biology, meteorology, and more unexpectedly, radiobiology and neurophysics. The classified documents I received clearance to view mentioned an anomalous seismic reflection detected by satellite mapping in 1956, which had prompted the establishment of Outpost 31 specifically at those coordinates. What troubled me most was discovering that a second expedition had been sent 6 months after the disappearance, a fact absent from my initial briefing. All records of this follow-up mission were heavily censored, with only equipment manifests and personnel lists partially visible. The mission duration was listed as 3 weeks, but no findings or conclusions were included in the documents. Colonel Robert Thompson leads our expedition, a decorated veteran with extensive cold weather operations experience. Yet, something about this mission has him constantly checking the horizon, as though expecting disaster. His nervous energy spreads through the crew like a contagion. I first noticed Thompson's peculiar behaviour during our initial briefing aboard the Polaris. While discussing approach vectors to Outpost 31, his hand involuntarily moved to his left forearm, clutching it through his sleeve as though it pained him. Throughout the voyage, I've observed him taking unmarked medication at regular intervals and conducting private communications with unknown parties via a secure radio channel in the ship's communications room. Even more telling is Thompson's reaction whenever the subject of the missing scientists arises. While maintaining military composure, I've noticed micro-expressions of what appears to be genuine fear, something unexpected in a man with his combat experience and decorations. "What exactly are we looking for, Colonel?" I'd asked him 3 days into our journey. "Beyond the missing personnel, that is." His response was measured, but revealing. "Our primary objective is recovery of any surviving expedition members, followed by retrieval of critical research materials and equipment." "And if we find neither?" Thompson had stared at the horizon before answering. "Then we determine exactly what happened to ensure it doesn't happen again, by any means necessary." The emphasis on those final words left little doubt that our mission parameters included potential destruction of the site if deemed necessary, an extreme contingency for what was officially classified as a search and rescue operation. Dr. Eleanor Frost joined us from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Her extensive knowledge of Antarctic climate and previous expedition experience makes her invaluable. Yet when I asked about her previous time on the continent, she became evasive, changing the subject with practiced efficiency. I'd researched Dr. Frost's background thoroughly before our departure. Her published work on ice core analysis and climate reconstruction showed remarkable insight into Antarctic geology, but a curious 2-year gap existed in her publication history from early 1958 to late 1959, precisely following the Outpost 31 incident. When I managed to access her personnel file through connections at Columbia, I discovered she'd been part of a classified polar research initiative during those missing years. My suspicions were confirmed one night in the ship's mess when I mentioned a distinctive glacial formation near the Ross ice shelf. "The locales at McMurdo Station call it the Cathedral," I remarked casually, watching her reaction. "There is no such formation," she replied immediately, then realized her mistake. The formation did exist, but only someone who had been to that precise region would know to contradict me. She'd revealed her familiarity with the territory while simultaneously denying previous presence there. When pressed, Frost claimed her knowledge came from colleagues' photographs, but her eyes darted to Colonel Thompson, who subtly shook his head, a silent communication that didn't escape my notice. Lieutenant Michael Hayes handles our communications equipment. His dark humour initially provided welcome relief from the growing tension, but lately, his jokes have taken on an unsettling quality, particularly when discussing the missing expedition. "Maybe they found something better down there," he quipped yesterday, "something worth becoming part of." Hayes' expertise extends beyond standard military communications training. I observed him modifying equipment with advanced components not listed in our manifest, including what appeared to be experimental frequency analyzers designed to detect signals in ranges well beyond normal radio spectrum. When questioned, he claimed they were precautionary upgrades given Antarctica's notorious communication difficulties. Most concerning was Hayes' behaviour during our 4th week at sea. He had been monitoring background radiation levels, supposedly routine procedure, when the equipment registered an anomalous spike, coinciding with a strange aurora appearance in the southern sky. Instead of reporting this through official channels, Hayes carefully documented the readings in a personal notebook I glimpsed later contained similar entries dating back weeks. The entries included timestamps and signal strength measurements, alongside cryptic notations like pattern recognition improving and frequency match at 94%. Our medical officer, Dr. Thomas Grant, maintains meticulous logs of everyone's physical and psychological condition. I've caught him studying me when he thinks I'm not looking, making notes with a troubled expression. When questioned, he insists it's standard protocol, but the intensity of his scrutiny suggests otherwise. Grant's medical credentials are impeccable. Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins residency, published research on extreme environment physiology. Yet, his equipment includes sophisticated neurological monitoring devices typically found in advanced research facilities, not field expeditions. His collection of blood samples exceeds standard medical protocols, and I've noticed he conducts analyses late at night when most of the crew is asleep. During a mandatory physical examination, Grant asked unusually specific questions about my sleeping patterns, particularly whether I'd experienced intrusive thoughts or unusual dreams involving non-Euclidean spaces. When I asked why such an oddly specific question was relevant, he claimed it was standard for polar expeditions to monitor for early signs of psychological strain, but I've participated in Arctic research before, and no such questions were ever included in psychological evaluations. Most troubling was discovering Grant's personal research notes, accidentally left in the ship's library, detailed protocols for identifying and documenting cognitive contamination patterns and progressive neurological alterations under exposure to unknown stimuli. The terminology matched no standard medical literature I was familiar with, suggesting specialized training for this specific mission. Strange occurrences have plagued our journey south, equipment malfunctions with increasing frequency. The ship's navigation systems showed us traveling in impossible directions for brief periods before correcting themselves. Most disturbing are the dreams, vivid nightmares of vast, ancient spaces beneath the ice, shared independently by multiple crew members, including myself. The first unexplained incident occurred 2 weeks into our voyage. The ship's chronometers, all of them simultaneously, stopped for precisely 3 minutes and 27 seconds before resuming normal function. The ship's engineer could provide no explanation, particularly since the mechanical chronometers should have been unaffected by any electrical anomaly. 3 days later, the communications array detected a powerful signal from the direction of Antarctica, despite our position being well outside normal radio range of any southern continent stations. Hayes analysed the signal but claimed it contained no decipherable information, just rhythmic pulses that matched no known transmission protocol. I later overheard him telling Colonel Thompson that the pulse pattern was identical to the January 16th recording. Most unsettling was the incident in the ship's galley. A glass of water left on a table began vibrating in distinct patterns, forming geometrically precise ripples across its surface. When measured with equipment from the science lab, the vibrations matched the exact frequency of the mystery signal Hayes had detected. The phenomenon lasted exactly 3 minutes and 27 seconds. The ship's compass began behaving erratically as we crossed the 60th parallel south. Rather than maintaining a steady orientation to magnetic north, the needle oscillated in regular patterns, almost like a form of communication. The oscillations intensified as we continued southward. Communications Officer Hayes managed to recover additional fragments from the final transmissions of the missing team. The reconstructed audio revealed disjointed phrases. The ice speaks. Ancient. Not alone down here. Changing us. Please understand we had no choice but to... Hayes's recovery efforts seemed to trigger increasingly strange phenomena aboard the Polaris. Electrical systems throughout the ship surged and failed in rhythmic patterns. The air temperature in isolated sections of the vessel dropped to below freezing, despite the heating systems functioning normally. Crew members reported hearing whispers in empty corridors, voices speaking words just beyond comprehension. Most disturbing was the water supply. Microscopic analysis of routine samples revealed unusual crystalline structures forming in the water, structures that would dissolve when removed from the liquid but reform in identical patterns when left undisturbed. Dr. Grant discovered similar crystalline structures in blood samples taken from crew members who had consumed the water, structures that seemed to orient themselves along nerve pathways. The nightmares intensified as we approached the Antarctic coast. In mine, I stand before an enormous wall of ice that somehow breathes, pulses with unnatural life. Something vast moves behind it, not physically but conceptually, as though the very idea of it is too enormous for reality to contain. My dreams became increasingly specific. I would find myself descending through layers of ice, each stratum representing a different geological epoch. The ice itself seemed to contain information, history recorded in its crystalline structure. Deeper and deeper I would go, the ice around me transitioning from white to blue to an impossible black that somehow emanated light. At the bottom of this dream descent always waited the wall, a vertical plane of something that resembled ice but behaved like a living membrane, pulsing with rhythms that matched human heartbeats and brainwaves simultaneously. Behind it moved a presence that communicated directly into my mind, bypassing language entirely. The messages left me with overwhelming sensations rather than coherent thoughts. Ancient patience, awakening awareness, and most disturbingly recognition, as though it had been waiting specifically for us. Other crew members reported similar dreams with disturbing consistency. Dr. Frost described the same wall, the same pulsing membrane. Hayes dreamed of radio equipment that received signals from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Dr. Grant's nightmares featured human bodies transforming in response to contact with the black ice, their neural pathways reconfiguring to accommodate information structures beyond human comprehension. Only Colonel Thompson claimed to sleep dreamlessly, but the dark circles beneath his eyes and his increasingly frequent visits to Dr. Grant suggested otherwise. We arrived at the coordinates for Outpost 31 yesterday morning. The perpetual daylight of Antarctic summer provided perfect visibility of the research station nestled against a vast ice shelf. From outside, everything appeared normal. No structural damage, no signs of catastrophe. The American flag still fluttered from its pole, frozen in mid-wave like a snapshot of normalcy. Our approach to the Antarctic coast had been challenging beyond normal navigational difficulties. Twice the ship's instruments indicated we were directly above the coordinates for Outpost 31, despite being clearly miles from shore. Ice formations appeared and disappeared from radar detection, as though the landscape itself was shifting to confound our navigation. Most striking was the unusual behavior of the local wildlife. A pod of killer whales surfaced near the Polaris, circling the vessel in patterns too precise to be natural. Their movements carved perfect geometric shapes in the water, circles, triangles, and more complex forms I couldn't identify. When Hayes attempted to record their vocalizations, the audio equipment registered sounds well outside the normal range of cetacean communication, structured patterns that resembled language more than animal calls. Seabirds exhibited similarly disturbing behavior, forming massive flocks that arranged themselves in complex changing formations overhead. The patterns they created cast shadows on the ship's deck that seemed to move independently of the birds themselves, flowing like liquid across the metal surface. As the Polaris navigated through the final approach to the research station, ice floes parted before our bow without physical contact, creating a perfect channel to our destination. The ship's sonar detected anomalous structures beneath us, vast geometric forms embedded in the seafloor that matched no known geological formations. The landing party assembled on deck as the research station came into view. The facility consisted of several interconnected buildings arranged in a rough circle around a central command structure, with additional outlying buildings for equipment storage and emergency shelter. The entire complex was built on pylons to prevent snow accumulation beneath the structures, giving it the appearance of hovering just above the ice sheet. Dr. Frost, examining the station through binoculars, was the first to notice the peculiarity. "The buildings are clear of snow," she observed. "After nearly 2 years of abandonment in Antarctica, there should be significant accumulation." She was right. Despite Antarctica's harsh weather conditions, the research station appeared almost pristine, as though maintenance crews had been regularly clearing the structures. Even more unsettling was the complete absence of wildlife around the facility. In normal circumstances, structures in Antarctica often attract penguins and other local fauna, seeking shelter from the elements, but no living creatures were visible anywhere near Outpost 31. As our landing craft approached the shore, instruments began malfunctioning in increasingly alarming ways. Compasses spun randomly, thermometers registered impossible temperature fluctuations. Radio contact with the Polaris became intermittent, the signals distorted by static that, when analysed later, contained the same rhythmic patterns we'd encountered throughout our journey south. A strange optical phenomenon surrounded the research station, a subtle distortion of light that made the buildings appear slightly out of phase with their surroundings, as though they existed partially in some other place. The effect was barely perceptible, but became increasingly obvious the closer we approached. Most disturbing was the silence. Antarctica is never truly quiet. Wind across ice creates distinctive sounds. Ice sheets crack and groan under their own weight. Wildlife adds their calls to the auditory landscape. But around Outpost 31, an unnatural stillness prevailed, as though sound itself was being absorbed by the environment. Colonel Thompson organised our approach with military precision, weapons drawn despite official reports indicating no signs of violence. The main entrance stood partially open. Snow drifted in the doorway. The generator hummed quietly, still operational after all this time. Inside, we discovered a perfectly preserved moment of interrupted life. Half-eaten meals sat frozen on plates in the mess hall. Coffee cups remained half full, the liquid inside solid. Personal quarters contained belongings laid out as though their owners had just stepped away momentarily. A record player in the recreation room held a vinyl disc, the needle poised above, but not touching the surface. Most unsettling of all, every clock in the facility had stopped at precisely 3:27 a.m. on January 17th, 1958. Not just electric clocks affected by power surges, even wind-up watches and mechanical chronometers had ceased functioning at that exact moment. The stopped clocks defied rational explanation. In the communication center, the primary chronometer, a high-precision mechanical device designed specifically to withstand Antarctic conditions, had stopped with its second hand precisely vertical. In the mess hall, the wall clock's second hand occupied the exact same position. Throughout the facility, in laboratories, personal quarters, and storage areas, every timepiece displayed 3:27 a.m., their second hands aligned in perfect synchronization. Dr. Grant attempted to restart one of the mechanical watches we found. The winding mechanism functioned perfectly, and internal examination showed no damage to the clockwork. Yet, the moment he released the winding crown, the second hand moved precisely to the vertical position and stopped. Repeated attempts produced identical results. Even more perplexing was the discovery of a digital clock in the backup power station, technology that shouldn't have been present in 1958. The LED display showed 3:27, along with the date, January 17th, 1958. Analysis of the components revealed manufacturing dates from 1967, 9 years after the base's abandonment. "This is impossible," Grant muttered, examining the device. This technology didn't exist when this base was operational, and even if it had somehow been added later, who would have installed it in an abandoned facility? Colonel Thompson's response chilled me. Who said the facility remained abandoned after the initial incident? My own wristwatch, previously functioning perfectly, began behaving erratically within hours of our arrival. The second hand would occasionally freeze at the vertical position for precisely 3 minutes and 27 seconds before resuming normal operation. By the end of our first day at Outpost 31, every timepiece brought by our expedition exhibited similar anomalies, functioning normally but periodically synchronizing with the stopped clocks of the abandoned base. "Check for bodies," ordered Thompson, his voice betraying the first hint of fear I'd heard from him. We found none. No blood, no signs of struggle, no indication of hasty evacuation. 47 people had simply ceased to exist, leaving everything else intact. In the research wing, laboratory equipment remained in mid-use. Microscopes contained prepared slides. Centrifuges held test tubes. Most significant were the ice core samples, dozens of them, extracted from deep below the base. The cores contained unusual black particles embedded within, unlike anything I'd seen in my years of geological research. The laboratory itself presented a disturbing tableau of interrupted scientific work. A coffee cup next to one microscope still contained liquid, not frozen despite the sub-freezing temperatures, but viscous and black like oil. When Dr. Grant attempted to sample the substance, it reacted to the metal probe, flowing up the instrument before he could withdraw it. He quarantined the probe immediately. Specimen containers lined the walls, filled with ice core samples organized chronologically by extraction depth. The shallowest samples appeared normal, compressed snow transitioning to solid ice with occasional air bubbles or sediment layers. But as the extraction depth increased, the samples changed dramatically. Colors shifted from white to blue to an impossible deep black that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Most peculiar were the black particles embedded within the deeper samples. They appeared geometrically perfect under preliminary microscopic examination. Precise cubes, spheres, and more complex polyhedrons arranged in patterns suggesting artificial rather than natural formation. When exposed to even minimal electrical current, the particles realigned themselves into new configurations, as though responding to the stimulus. One storage unit contained biological specimens, unlike anything in published Antarctic ecology. Tissue samples labelled as extracted from indigenous fauna bore no resemblance to known wildlife. Cellular structures displayed impossible complexity, with organelle-like structures arranged in patterns that Dr. Grant described as more engineered than evolved. Dr. Frost examined the research logs with growing alarm. "They were drilling," she whispered, "much deeper than their mission parameters allowed. The last entry mentions reaching a depth of over 2 miles before encountering anomalous resistance." "What does that mean?" Hayes asked, peering over her shoulder. "It means the ice didn't behave like ice," she replied. "It behaved like something alive." The research logs themselves exhibited increasingly erratic documentation standards as they progressed. Early entries followed strict scientific protocol, precise measurements, objective observations, methodical testing procedures, but later entries became more subjective, filled with speculative interpretations and philosophical digressions unusual in scientific documentation. Dr. Ambrose's handwriting changed subtly throughout the logs. His initially precise script gradually transformed. incorporating strange symbols between conventional letters. In the final pages, entire paragraphs were written in an unknown script that resembled no human language but contained recognizable mathematical notations interspersed throughout. Most alarming were the medical records maintained by the expedition's physician. Initial physiological baselines for all team members showed normal human parameters. Subsequent examinations documented progressive anomalies, slightly elevated body temperatures, altered brainwave patterns, enhanced night vision, and most significantly, increased neural activity in brain regions associated with pattern recognition and spatial reasoning. The final medical entry, dated January 16, 1958, contained a single line: no longer baseline human. Classification pending proper taxonomic verification. Frost discovered a hidden compartment beneath one of the laboratory workstations, containing research materials not included in the official logs. These documents revealed the expedition's true purpose, not just scientific exploration, but investigation of an anomalous subglacial structure detected by classified satellite imaging technology. The documents included communication transcripts between Outpost 31 and military command discussing containment protocols and asset acquisition rather than pure research objectives. Among these classified materials was a map detailing the precise drilling location, not randomly selected for geological sampling, but carefully positioned to intercept what appeared to be an enormous spherical structure embedded 2 miles beneath the ice sheet. That evening, as we established our base camp within the abandoned facility, Thompson revealed the first piece of classified information. Ground-penetrating radar surveys had detected a large cavity beneath the research station, approximately 2 miles below the surface. No natural geological process could explain its perfectly spherical shape. "That's what they found," Thompson explained, his voice low, as though afraid of being overheard, despite the fact that we were the only people within hundreds of miles, and whatever happened to them is connected to that discovery. We gathered in what had been the station's conference room, our equipment establishing a small island of modern technology within the preserved moment of 1958. Thompson unfolded a series of radar imaging maps across the table, revealing detailed subsurface scans of the area beneath Outpost 31. This cavity was first detected by experimental ground-penetrating radar in 1956, Thompson explained, indicating the perfect sphere outlined in the deepest scan. The technology was primitive by our standards, showing only a void where there should have been solid ice. The International Geophysical Year provided perfect cover to establish this facility and investigate further. "How could a spherical cavity form naturally at that depth?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "It couldn't," Dr. Frost replied before Thompson could respond. Her eyes never left the radar image. The pressure at that depth would collapse any natural cavity. This structure was engineered. Thompson nodded grimly. The project began as pure research, drilling ice cores to reach and examine the anomaly. But as they penetrated deeper layers of ice, they began finding irregularities. He produced a classified research document, sections heavily redacted, even in this supposedly complete briefing. The black particles appeared first at approximately 1 mile depth. Analysis showed they were not naturally occurring minerals or meteorite fragments, but constructed materials with internal complexity visible only under electron microscopy. Dr. Grant studied the electron microscope images with growing concern. These aren't simple structures. They contain what appear to be microscopic mechanical components and circuitry, but utilizing principles I don't recognize. "Correct," Thompson confirmed. The working theory became that these particles were components of a larger system that had somehow disintegrated throughout the ice sheet, possibly fragments of an ancient technological device, or, he hesitated, a distributed intelligence system. The explanation hung in the air. It its implications too vast to immediately comprehend. As the drilling continued, Thompson resumed, after a heavy silence, team members began experiencing unusual cognitive effects. Enhanced pattern recognition, accelerated learning capabilities, dreams containing information they couldn't possibly know. The particles were theorized to be information storage devices of some kind, and proximity was somehow transferring data directly to human neural systems. Hayes, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. And they kept drilling? Despite these effects? They accelerated the drilling, Thompson replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. The military liaison saw potential weapons applications. The scientists saw the greatest discovery in human history. No one considered the possibility that they were being influenced to continue. Influenced by what? I asked. Thompson's hand moved unconsciously to his left forearm, gripping it through his uniform sleeve. By whatever is contained within that sphere. The following morning, we located the drill shaft. The massive boring equipment stood silent beside a perfectly circular hole descending into darkness. Next to it lay a hastily established elevator system capable of lowering personnel and equipment into the depths. "We need to go down there," I stated, surprising myself with my certainty. Thompson hesitated for the first time since I'd met him. "My orders are to investigate and recover any personnel or critical research," he said slowly, "not to replicate their mistakes." "Without understanding what happened below, we'll never know what happened to them," Dr. Frost countered. "We're scientists, Colonel. We came for answers." The debate continued through the morning, with Thompson reluctantly agreeing to a controlled descent. Safety protocols were established. No one would go alone. Communication lines would remain open at all times and unusual effects would be reported immediately. Dr. Grant insisted on conducting medical examinations before the descent, establishing baselines for vital signs and neurological activity. During my examination, he leaned close, speaking quietly so the others couldn't hear. "Your brain activity shows unusual patterns in the visual processing regions," he said, showing me the readout, similar to changes documented in the original expedition members before they disappeared. "What does that mean?" I asked, unsettled by the comparison. "I don't know," Grant admitted, "but I've observed similar patterns in everyone since our arrival. Whatever affected them is beginning to affect us." The descent began at noon, with Thompson insisting on leading the first team himself, accompanied by Hayes and 2 military personnel. Dr. Frost, Grant and I would monitor from the surface, maintaining constant radio contact. The plan called for a preliminary survey only, no sample collection, no extended observations. The elevator, essentially a reinforced cage on a cable system, creaked ominously as it was prepared for descent. Hayes established a video feed that would transmit to our monitoring station, though he warned that interference was likely at greater depths. Previous attempts at visual documentation deteriorated significantly below 1 mile, he explained, adjusting the camera equipment. The final video transmissions from the original expedition were 87% static. Radio checks complete, the first team boarded the elevator. Thompson's expression was unreadable as he gave the signal to begin the descent. The massive winch system engaged, and the elevator cage slowly disappeared into the darkness of the shaft. For the first 30 minutes, everything proceeded normally. The video feed showed smooth ice walls surrounding the shaft. Occasional equipment left by the original drilling team, still embedded in the ice. Radio communication remained clear, with Thompson providing regular status updates. At approximately 1 mile depth, the first anomalies appeared. The video feed began showing intermittent static and the radio transmissions acquired a faint background signal, the same rhythmic pattern we'd encountered throughout our journey. "We're encountering the first zone of black particle concentration," Thompson reported, his voice maintaining military composure despite the circumstances. "Hayes is collecting preliminary readings." The video briefly cleared, showing patches of ice containing dense concentrations of the black particles. Unlike normal inclusions in ice, which remain stationary, these particles appeared to move in response to the light from the elevator cage, reorganizing themselves into new configurations as the team descended past them. The particles are orientation specific. Hayes' voice came through the radio. They're tracking our movement and... His voice faltered briefly. I believe they're scanning us somehow. At approximately 1.5 miles depth, the elevator suddenly halted, the automatic brake systems engaging without command. "We've stopped," Thompson reported. "No mechanical failure evident. The system simply decided to stop." Dr. Frost, monitoring the depth indicators, pointed to something alarming. "That's exactly the same depth where the original expedition reported their first major discovery," she said. "Look at what's on the video." The video feed showed a single boot, frozen to the tunnel wall, empty yet positioned, as though its wearer had been walking horizontally across the vertical surface before. What? Melting into the ice itself? More disturbing was what surrounded the boot. Ice that didn't behave like normal ice. Instead of the clear blue or white we'd expect, this section had subtle flowing patterns within it, almost like currents in water, despite being solid enough to maintain the structural integrity of the tunnel. "Are you seeing this?" Thompson's voice had lost some of its professional detachment. "We see it," I confirmed. "The ice appears to be in motion despite remaining solid." "It's not just moving," Hayes added, his voice hushed with awe or fear. "It's responding to our presence. Watch!" The camera focused on a section of the unusual ice. Hayes moved his gloved hand towards it without touching the surface. The flowing patterns within the ice altered their course, creating swirling eddies that tracked his hand's movement precisely. "Do not make physical contact with the anomalous ice," I instructed sharply. "Continue the descent." The elevator resumed its journey downward after some mechanical coaxing. For the next quarter mile, the shaft walls displayed increasing amounts of the flowing ice, interspersed with equipment abandoned by the original expedition. Tools, sample containers, even personal items like a glove or flashlight, all partially embedded in the responsive material. At approximately 1.75 miles deep, the video feed deteriorated significantly, showing mostly static with occasional clear frames. The radio transmission became similarly affected, Thompson's updates coming through in fragments. Approaching the chamber, static interrupted, change in structure, more interference, temperature rising significantly. Dr. Frost monitored the environmental readings transmitted from the elevator's sensors. "The temperature at their depth is increasing rapidly," she reported with disbelief. "Currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. That's physically impossible at that depth and pressure." The elevator continued its descent for another mile before shuddering to a halt. The video feed cleared momentarily, showing the elevator had reached the bottom of the shaft. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that defied all logical explanation of Antarctic geography. The space stretched at least 100 yards in diameter, with a domed ceiling, its walls covered in markings that resembled writing, but matched no known human language. Most shocking was the temperature. The chamber was warm, approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit, despite being surrounded by ice and located deep below the Antarctic surface. No heat source was visible. "My God," Thompson's voice came through clearly for the first time in minutes. "It's all still here, exactly as they left it." The missing expedition had established an extensive research camp within the chamber. Advanced equipment surrounded what appeared to be their primary focus, a smooth vertical ice wall at the chamber's far end that reflected light differently than normal ice, giving it an almost metallic quality. "This is impossible," Dr. Frost whispered, her scientific composure cracking. "This chamber can't exist. The ice pressure at this depth would collapse any cavity of this size." Yet here we stand, I replied, my voice echoing strangely in the space. The first team spent an hour documenting the chamber and the abandoned research equipment. They discovered the original expedition had essentially relocated their entire operation to this impossible space, bringing down laboratory equipment, living quarters and communication systems, far more than would be justified for a simple geological survey. They were living down here, Hayes observed, the camera panning across makeshift sleeping areas. Why would they abandon the perfectly good facilities above? The answer seemed connected to the wall at the far end of the chamber, the focus of most of the abandoned research equipment. Unlike the natural ice formation surrounding it, this wall stood perfectly vertical and smooth, its surface reflective, like polished metal, yet appearing to be composed of the same flowing ice we'd observed in the tunnel. I'm returning to the surface, Thompson announced abruptly. Hayes and the others will continue preliminary documentation. We need to discuss our findings before proceeding further. When Thompson emerged from the elevator an hour later, his composure had noticeably deteriorated. His left hand trembled slightly, and perspiration beaded on his forehead despite the controlled temperature in the station. The wall, he said without preamble, it's not a natural formation. It's a barrier, deliberately constructed and maintained. Constructed by whom? Grant asked. Thompson's expression darkened. That's classified information even beyond this mission's parameters. What matters is what's behind it. You know what's behind it? I asked, incredulous. How could you possibly? Because I've been here before, Thompson interrupted, rolling up his left sleeve to reveal what he'd been hiding since the beginning of our expedition. His forearm was covered in dark veins that branched across his skin, like a living tattoo. But they weren't veins, they were the same black particles we'd observed in the ice cores, somehow embedded beneath his skin in complex, deliberate patterns. I led the second expedition, he confessed. 6 months after the first group vanished, we found exactly what you just saw. The chamber, the equipment, the wall. We investigated for 3 weeks before. He trailed off, staring at the patterns on his arm. Before what? Dr. Frost pressed. Before the wall opened, Thompson said simply. Most of my team approached it. I was operating the elevator, bringing down additional equipment. When I returned, they were gone. And this, he gestured to his arm, had begun spreading through my body. I managed to return to the surface and escape. Why wasn't this included in our briefing? I demanded. Because the military has been studying me ever since, Thompson replied bitterly, using my blood to develop weapons and communications technology based on whatever is happening to me. This mission isn't about rescue or recovery. It's about gathering more samples from the source. The revelation cast our mission in an entirely new light. We weren't there to find missing personnel or understand what had happened. We were being deliberately exposed to whatever lay beneath the ice, our reactions documented as part of a larger experiment. After heated debate, we decided to continue our investigation. Despite Thompson's warnings, we established a research base in the chamber, taking shifts to monitor the wall and analyze the abandoned equipment. Hayes managed to reactive much of the original expedition's technology, including sophisticated scanning equipment aimed at the wall. Lieutenant Michael Hayes approached a sophisticated array of monitoring equipment directed at the unusual ice wall. This is military-grade sensor technology, he observed, not standard for a scientific expedition. With his expertise, Hayes managed to reactivate the monitoring systems. Screens flickered to life, displaying readings that made no sense at first. Complex waveform patterns cycling in rhythmic sequences. It's monitoring low-frequency signals, Hayes explained, adjusting controls, coming from behind that wall. As he amplified the signal, a strange sensation washed over me. A pressure behind my eyes and a ringing in my ears that wasn't quite sound but something deeper, more primal. The waveform on the screen suddenly looked familiar to me. That's brainwave activity, Dr. Grant said, confirming my suspicion, but the complexity is unlike anything I've ever seen. Orders of magnitude beyond human neural patterns. I noticed something else in the pattern, a correlation with geological events throughout Earth's history. Major extinction events, tectonic shifts, polar reversals, all appeared as distinct signatures within the signal's pattern. This thing, whatever it is, I said slowly, has been here for millions of years. Dormant. Waiting. Colonel Thompson's face had gone pale. We need to leave, now. We can't leave, Dr. Frost argued. This could be the most significant scientific discovery in human history. This is exactly why the first team disappeared, Thompson snapped back. They stayed too long, they listened too closely. Over the next 3 days, we established a research perimeter in the chamber, working in shifts to analyze the incredible discovery. Strange phenomena began almost immediately. Team members reported missing time, beginning a task only to find hours had passed in what felt like minutes. Others saw impossible reflections in ice surfaces, not of themselves but of altered versions, older, younger, or somehow fundamentally changed. The temperature fluctuated wildly without explanation, rising to tropical levels before plummeting well below freezing. Yet, the chamber itself remained structurally stable, despite these thermodynamic impossibilities. Most disturbing were the voices. At first, just at the edge of hearing, whispers in an unknown language that seemed to emanate from the ice itself. By the third day, everyone acknowledged hearing them, calling from behind the wall, speaking words we couldn't understand but somehow felt we should. Dr. Grant discovered something alarming during routine medical checks, microscopic organisms in our bloodstream that resembled nothing in medical literature. When questioned about reporting this development to our superiors via the communication relay, to the surface, Colonel Thompson vetoed the decision with unusual vehemence. They already know, he said grimly. They're counting on it. The wall itself began to change as our research progressed. The flowing patterns within its surface grew more complex, forming structures that resembled organic systems, neural networks, circulatory systems, respiratory organs, as though the wall itself was developing anatomy. More alarming was its responsiveness. When researchers approached with certain equipment, the patterns would reorganize to mirror the internal components of the devices. When blood samples were analyzed nearby, the wall would form structures resembling magnified human cells. It was learning, adapting, preparing. Tensions escalated rapidly. Hayes accused Thompson of knowing more than he revealed. Dr. Frost became obsessively focused on the wall, spending hours staring at its surface, occasionally pressing her hands against it despite safety protocols. Dr. Grant began collecting blood samples with increasing frequency, his medical curiosity overriding his obvious fear. On our 5th day in the chamber, I discovered a hidden journal wedged behind some equipment. It belonged to Dr. Victor Ambrose, the lead scientist of the original expedition. Its contents confirmed our growing suspicions. The military had detected something ancient, awakening, beneath the Antarctic ice. The research outpost established during the International Geophysical Year had been a cover for their true mission, to investigate and potentially contain whatever lurked below. Ambrose's final entries grew increasingly disjointed. January 15th, 1958. The entity communicates through changes in our neural pathways. Not invasion, evolution. It offers something beyond human limitations. Some of the team have already accepted. January 16th, 1958. Those who've accepted are changing. Their thoughts become accessible to me in fragments. They understand now why it must spread. The threat coming from beyond requires preparation. Earth requires guardians with greater awareness. January 17th, 1958. We will become the message ourselves. Integration begins at 3:27. Those who resist will be given more time to understand. The ice preserves everything. When confronted with the journal, Colonel Thompson finally revealed the truth. He wasn't sent to rescue anyone, he was sent to assess whether the site should be destroyed. He pulled back his sleeve, revealing a forearm covered in spreading black veins, similar to the particles in the ice cores. "I've been here before," he confessed. "I was part of a second team sent 6 months after the disappearance. We were contaminated within days, just like now. I escaped, but the changes followed me. The military has been studying me, using my blood to develop weapons. This isn't a rescue mission. It's a harvest." His revelation divided our team. Hayes immediately sided with Thompson, his military training overriding scientific curiosity. Dr. Frost argued passionately for continued research, insisting that what we faced wasn't a threat but an opportunity for unprecedented advancement. Dr. Grant remained undecided, torn between medical ethics and the potential benefits of studying the phenomenon. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of mediator, understanding both perspectives while increasingly drawn to the wall and whatever intelligence lurked behind it. My dreams had become more vivid, not nightmares now but visions of technological and biological integration beyond anything humans had achieved, knowledge spanning millions of years, compressed into symbolic representations my sleeping mind could barely comprehend. The black particles weren't just frozen microorganisms, as we'd theorized. They were microscopic data storage devices of non-human design, programmed to alter their hosts at the cellular level, creating biological receivers for whatever lay behind the wall. That night, while the others slept, I examined ice core samples we'd retrieved from the original expedition's collection. Under microscopic analysis, the particles appeared to arrange themselves in response to my bioelectric field, forming structures that somehow conveyed meaning directly to my mind rather than through visual interpretation. They showed me fragments of memory, not mine, but those of the missing expedition members. Their transformation hadn't been horrific as we'd feared. Their consciousness expanded beyond individual identity, becoming part of a vast awareness that had monitored our planet since before humans evolved. The wall wasn't containing something threatening. It was protecting something vulnerable until the right moment. When I returned to the chamber from the makeshift laboratory, I found it transformed. The walls had begun shifting, geometric patterns flowing through the ice like living circuitry. Dr. Frost stood before the wall, her hands pressed against its surface, which now rippled like liquid around her fingers. "It's showing me," she whispered without turning, "the threat coming from deep space. A cosmic filter that destroys civilizations when they reach a certain technological threshold. It's happened before, to them. They escaped here, left this guardian to prepare Earth when the time came." Colonel Thompson entered the chamber, his expression grim, carrying what could only be demolition charges. "Step away from the wall, Dr. Frost. We're leaving and burying this place." "You don't understand what's happening," she argued, not moving from the wall. "They're not invaders, they're refugees. Their civilization was destroyed by something that's still out there, still hunting. They came here millions of years ago, embedded themselves in the ice to hide and to warn us when the time came." "I understand perfectly," Thompson countered. "They're manipulating you, just like they manipulated the original team. They need hosts, human bodies to spread their consciousness. They're parasites." "Symbionts," Frost corrected. "They offer in exchange their knowledge for our physical form, a merging that creates something greater than either alone." Hayes stood in the elevator doorway, weapon drawn but clearly uncertain. Dr. Grant moved cautiously along the chamber's perimeter, medical scanner in hand, documenting the rapidly accelerating changes in the ice. "The particles in our bloodstream," Grant announced, studying his readings. "They're not invading our cells. They're rewriting our DNA to accommodate new neural structures. It's directed evolution, millions of years of advancement in days. Which is exactly why this site must be destroyed, Thompson insisted. Humanity gets to choose its own evolutionary path, not some alien intelligence hiding beneath the ice. The confrontation shattered our already fragile group. Hayes sided with Thompson, his military training overriding scientific curiosity. Dr. Grant remained undecided, torn between fear and the unprecedented medical implications of what we'd discovered. "Look at your arm, Colonel," I said quietly. "The changes have already begun in you. They've been spreading for years, haven't they? That's why the military keeps you under observation. That's why you take medication to suppress the symptoms." Thompson's expression confirmed my suspicion. "The changes can be controlled," he insisted. "Contained. But not if we allow this awakening to continue." As they argued, the chamber began changing more rapidly. The walls pulsed with increasing frequency. The temperature rose sharply. The voices from behind the wall grew louder, no longer indecipherable but somehow transmitting concepts directly into our minds. Thompson moved to place the charges against the wall. I tackled him, surprising myself with the decision. The explosives scattered across the floor. In the ensuing struggle, Hayes attempted to restrain Dr. Frost, who fought with unexpected strength, her eyes now reflecting the same patterns visible in the ice. "The missing expedition," she gasped between breaths. "They're still here, in the ice, in the signal. They understood what was necessary." A deafening crack reverberated through the chamber as fissures appeared in the wall. Thompson abandoned the fight, scrambling to retrieve the explosive charges. The rest of us stood transfixed as the wall began to split open, revealing not open space behind it, but a swirling, luminescent medium that resembled neither solid, liquid, nor gas. "Run!" Thompson screamed, activating the detonator sequence. Self-preservation finally overcame scientific curiosity. We rushed toward the elevator, all except Dr. Frost, who walked deliberately toward the opening wall, her arms outstretched in welcome. The fissures in the ice spread throughout the chamber, reaching the ceiling and walls.